Have you ever trusted a stranger in your home, only to realize they might be there for more than just a simple job? I never thought a leaking pipe could change anything. It was a small thing, annoying, but nothing to lose sleep over. But when I called a plumber, I never imagined the repair would turn into something I couldn't shake off. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship. I wasn't ready for the silence that filled my apartment every night, but I had to learn to live with it. The leak in the bathroom was just another reminder of how much I still had to take care of on my own. So, I called the plumber, just a guy to fix a pipe, nothing more. He showed up as expected. Friendly, a little too polite, but nothing that made me uncomfortable. We talked a little as he worked. I was just trying to get through the day, you know. At least the company was nice. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way he lingered in the room just a little too long, or how his attention seemed to focus on me more than the job. It didn't seem like much at first. Nothing overt. But as the day wore on, the feeling kept growing. Still, I pushed it down. I figured I'd let him finish and call it a day, go to bed, and sleep it off like any other night. But that night, I woke up. I didn't expect to find him standing in my room. I didn't expect anything that happened after that. I had no idea how much that simple repair would change everything. I had just ended a long-term relationship, one that had taken more than I was willing to admit. You'd think I'd be relieved, free from the weight of someone else's expectations, but the truth was, I wasn't sure who I was without him. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. And no matter how many times I rearranged the furniture, it didn't seem to help. There was an emptiness that couldn't be filled by anything, books, Netflix, or even trying to keep myself busy at work. I hated that feeling. I didn't want to be the girl who clung to the past, but loneliness crept up in the most unexpected moments. I'd find myself looking out the window, wondering what it would be like to have someone next to me again, someone who could just understand the weight of all the things I didn't say. But the thought of opening up to anyone new was overwhelming. It felt too soon. Too risky. I didn't want to jump into anything or let anyone in, but at the same time, a small part of me longed for a connection, anything, really. Even just for a moment, someone who might take the edge off the loneliness. So, when I called the plumber, I wasn't expecting much, just a simple repair and then back to my usual routine. But he wasn't like the typical worker you hire. He was warm, genuine, almost disarming in his attentiveness. He didn't rush through the job. He took his time, checking everything thoroughly, making small talk in between. At first, I found myself reacting in ways I wasn't used to, laughing at his stories, enjoying the ease of the conversation. It was as though he wasn't just there to fix a pipe, but to take the time to listen, to actually hear me. And that, for some reason, made it easier to talk. There was something about him, his presence, that made me feel at ease, like I could breathe a little easier in my own home. The way he asked questions about my day, the way he seemed to care just a little more than someone fixing a pipe should, left me both grateful and confused. I found myself looking forward to his next words, surprised at how effortless it felt to let him in, even just a little. But then, I remembered why I had called him in the first place. A leaky pipe. Nothing more. And I didn't want to read too much into it, because the last thing I needed was to complicate things. But, in that moment, something felt different. Something about him felt different. As the hours passed, I found myself listening more intently than I should have, drawn into his stories. He talked about his family, the little things that made him laugh, like his niece's obsession with collecting rocks. I smiled more than I had in weeks, surprised at how easy it was to connect with someone in such a simple, everyday way. There was something refreshing about his stories, no pretenses, just honesty. At one point, he mentioned how he'd gotten into plumbing as a way to stay busy after his divorce. Sometimes you just need to fix things, you know, he said, glancing up from the pipe he was working on. There was something in the way he said it, like he wasn't just talking about pipes, but life in general. I couldn't help but chuckle, a little relieved that he seemed to understand without even realizing it. It was a quiet moment, but it meant something more than just idle chatter. He caught the laugh, his eyes brightening for a split second. "That's the first time I've heard you laugh since I've been here," he said with a grin. It felt odd, but in a good way, to be seen like that, really seen. And for a brief moment, the loneliness that had been eating away at me seemed to fade, replaced by the kind of connection I hadn't even realized I needed. But it wasn't anything serious, of course. He was just a guy fixing a pipe. We were two strangers having a friendly chat, nothing more. As he finished up, I found myself wishing the conversation didn't have to end. It was strange, so easy to talk to him, like we'd known each other longer than just a few hours. But then the reality hit me. He was just here to fix the leak. That was all this was. I thanked him for his work, feeling oddly reluctant to say goodbye. I was aware of the weight of the moment, like something unspoken lingered between us. But as he gathered his tools and headed for the door, I tried to shake the feeling. This was just one more fleeting interaction in a world full of them. I thought about how I'd probably never see him again, how tomorrow would come, and it would all be back to normal. I could almost feel myself shutting down the thoughts, tucking them away for later. But that night, as I lay in bed, his voice still echoed in my mind, soft and easy, making me question the space I'd allowed him to fill in such a short time. I told myself it didn't matter. After all, he was just a plumber, right? I woke up suddenly, my heart racing. For a few seconds, I was disoriented, still tangled in the haze of sleep. The room was dim, the soft glow of the streetlight outside casting shadows on the walls. But something felt off. The air felt heavier, charged in a way I couldn't quite explain. It took me a moment to adjust my eyes to the darkness, and then I saw him, standing in the doorway, just a few feet from my bed. I froze. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. My first thought was, why is he in here? The second thought, just as quickly, was, how did he get in? He must have sensed my shock because he immediately spoke, almost a little too quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you." His voice was low, hesitant, but calm. "I'm just checking the pipes that connect to the wall here. It's part of the system, you know, just making sure everything's in order." His explanation, though a bit awkward, broke the tension slightly. I couldn't decide whether to feel alarmed or confused. My heart was still pounding, but something about the way he stood there, his eyes not quite meeting mine, his body tense as if waiting for me to say something, made it hard to stay angry or even scared. It was as though he was just waiting. Waiting for me to let him stay. As I lay there, trying to wrap my mind around what was happening, I felt an odd mix of emotions I couldn't quite place. Alarm was there, of course, but so was curiosity, a thread of excitement, maybe even something else. My mind kept trying to make sense of it all, but it was like my body was reacting before I had time to think. I shifted slightly, and in the silence that followed, I realized how close he was, how small the room felt now. His presence was almost magnetic, pulling me out of the fog of sleep, but also drawing me into something unfamiliar, something I hadn't expected. I wasn't sure if I should ask him to leave or if I should just let him stay there, in the quiet of my room. My heart raced, not from fear, but from something else entirely. The way he looked at me, still hesitant but somehow softer than before, made me wonder if he had felt it too. That connection. That tension. And as the seconds stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment that would change everything. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Neither of us said anything at first, and I wondered if either of us had the words to break the silence. But then, as if on cue, he stepped closer, almost imperceptibly. "I didn't mean to freak you out," he said softly, his voice no longer the confident one it had been when he first entered. There was a vulnerability in it now, a crack in the armor. I met his eyes, surprised to find that I wasn't scared anymore. There was a softness to him I hadn't noticed before, and somehow, I felt the same way, drawn to him, in a way that made my pulse quicken, but not in fear. Just curiosity. I've been through a lot lately, he continued, his voice quieter now, almost as though he didn't want to say it aloud. My divorce was messy. I wasn't expecting to feel so lost after. Like, I thought I'd be fine, but I wasn't. I started fixing things, pipes, broken appliances, whatever I could. It felt like if I could fix enough stuff, maybe I could fix myself. He let out a small, self-deprecating laugh, but it was clear it didn't have any real humor in it. I guess that's why I'm here, huh? Fixing something else. There was a raw honesty in his words that made me want to say something, anything to let him know I understood. But instead, I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Maybe it was because his words rang so true to my own heart. I had been so careful not to open up after the breakup. So careful not to let anyone in, because I was afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of what might happen if I did. But here, in the quiet of my room, with him standing so close, I felt like maybe it was okay to drop my guard for once. I know what you mean, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to keep it all together after everything fell apart. But some days, it's just hard. Like, there's this hole, you know. And no matter what I do, it's still there. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, and once I started talking, it felt like I couldn't stop. I told him about the long nights, the loneliness that weighed me down, and how, even though I'd ended it, I wasn't really sure who I was without him. Without us. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. And for the first time in a long while, I felt heard. Not judged. Not dismissed. Just understood. I don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere in the middle of that conversation, the air shifted. The quiet, shared understanding between us deepened, and in the dim light of the room, everything else faded away. The world outside didn't matter. All that mattered was this moment, the vulnerability, the connection, the way we were both opening up in ways we hadn't allowed ourselves to before. It wasn't a question of attraction anymore. It was something else. Something I couldn't put into words. When he reached out, his hand tentative but sure, I didn't pull back. Instead, I leaned into it. He placed his lips on mine, it was lovely, soft. I could feel his tongue, his breath was warm, he started caressing my body, my hand moved slow down his middle leg, I could feel it, his rod it was hard and big, the kiss, the touch everything felt lovely. And without thinking, without needing to say anything more, we both crossed that line together. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't about the physical. It was about finally finding a sense of belonging in the presence of someone who truly saw me, someone who, in a way, was as broken as I was. But in that quiet space, we didn't need to be fixed. I could feel his rod thrusting inside of me, never felt this good in a long while. It felt great. It wasn't about what we did next, it was about the connection we shared, the understanding that didn't need to be spoken aloud. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel so alone. I woke up to the soft light filtering through the blinds, my mind still clouded by sleep and the remnants of the night before. My heart thudded, an echo of everything that had happened. I turned slowly, feeling the empty space beside me, the faint warmth still lingering on the sheets where he had been. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the events of the night. The conversation. The connection. The way everything had felt so natural, so real, and yet so completely unexpected. But as the warmth of the morning's sunlight began to fill the room, so did the weight of everything else, the questions, the doubts, the confusion. What was this? I reached up, rubbing my eyes, still trying to grasp the reality of it. My body felt different, lighter somehow, as though the weight of the past few months had been lifted, if only for a moment. I felt content, in a way. But at the same time, I felt an emptiness, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind reminding me that what had happened wasn't simple. Was it a step forward? Or just a momentary escape from everything I was running from? I had been so careful, so guarded, holding everything inside, afraid to open up to anyone. But now, here I was, questioning whether that vulnerability had been empowering or reckless. There was a part of me that felt a sense of relief, like I'd finally let someone in, shared a piece of myself that I hadn't been able to show anyone else in a long time. But then another part of me wondered if I had done it because I was desperate, seeking any kind of connection, no matter the cost. Had I let myself be swept away by the fleeting comfort of being seen, of being understood, just for a night? And now, where did that leave me? I couldn't help but wonder if this encounter had been the healthy step I'd been looking for, a moment of connection that would help me heal. Or had I simply let myself be impulsive, caught up in the warmth of someone else's attention, only to be left with more questions than answers? As I lay there, my thoughts swirled. I kept asking myself what I really wanted out of future relationships. Was I seeking companionship? A deep, lasting connection? Or was I just craving something, anything, to fill the void of loneliness? I didn't have answers. I only had more questions, swirling in my head, refusing to be quieted. The connection with him had been real. That much was undeniable. But what did it mean for me? And for him? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing: this night, this unexpected encounter, had changed something inside me. Whether for better or worse, I couldn't say yet. But the answers were still out there, somewhere, waiting for me to find them. As I lay there, still processing everything, I couldn't help but think about how unpredictable human connections really are. We go through life, building walls to protect ourselves from pain, from hurt. But then, in the most unexpected moments, those walls come down, sometimes, without us even realizing it. What happens then? When we open ourselves up to someone, just a little bit, even when we're unsure. It's like the universe pushes us to face parts of ourselves we've been avoiding. Sometimes, it's messy, and sometimes it's beautiful. And sometimes, it's both. It made me wonder, where does vulnerability lead us? Is it always a path to healing? Or is there a line we cross when we let ourselves be too open, too impulsive? After all, in that moment, I let my guard down completely, and while part of me felt like I had found something real, another part of me wondered if I had done it out of loneliness, out of a need for connection, no matter the consequences. What if opening ourselves up to someone isn't always about finding answers? What if it's about experiencing something we need at that exact moment, whether that leads to healing or just a fleeting sense of being seen? I guess that's the beauty of life, how unpredictable it can be. How we never know when a simple encounter, a shared conversation, or even a single night, will change everything. So, I'll leave you with this: sometimes, letting your guard down brings healing in ways we least expect. But where's the line between vulnerability and impulsiveness? Only time can tell. So, what do you think? Have you ever had a moment where you connected unexpectedly with a stranger or made an impulsive decision during a time when you were feeling vulnerable? It's crazy how those moments can change everything, right? Now, let me ask you, do you think she took a real step toward healing, or was this something she might regret later? Where do you think the line between vulnerability and impulsiveness really lies? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your stories and opinions in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to please subscribe to the channel.